Okay, I hope everybody can hear me okay. As I said, this is a new one for us, and I'm currently looking at this with a laptop in front of a big screen, so it's a bit with no controls over it. So it's a bit interesting to see what happens. But we'll kick straight off. Look, going to four-legged friends. I start at the beginning, and donkeys. They've been used for transporting people and goods for thousands of years. And there's one place in Gloucestershire where they're a good idea. It's in Chalford. So this is a couple of pictures of some of the donkey deliveries that were happening around Chalford, and they've been going on since probably the 1880s onwards. Stopped around about 1930, although some people say they lasted on a little bit later into the 1940s. So again, this has been donkeys look fairly happy in both occasions. These are supposed to be called Jenny the donkey, but of course the Jenny is a female donkey anyway, so we don't really know what their names were. Um, Oxen, we tend to think oxen have been medieval draft animals, but they remained in use for quite a long time. And this is a picture of taken in Cirencester Park of a six-strong team harrowing around 1920. So they were still used then, up to then. There's no need to get rid of them. They were actually quite cost effective, more cost effective than horses, as they could pull heavier loads for a longer period of time and they could eat cheaper food, but they were very much slower. But the bonus being is you could eat them when they sort of reach the end of their lives, which is not much good for the oxen, but it's okay for us. And of course, they remain indelibly linked with the Gloucestershire landscape thanks to the place names: Oxbody in Gloucester, Oxenton, Oxhall, Oxlynch, Oxpend, Oxwick, and there's several more from that as well. But this is a quite nice picture. I did like this one. I wonder what the old man's having a swig off there on the harrower. Bet it's a cider or something. Horses, we tend to forget now how important horses were and how great the bond between sort of the horse users and the actual animals were. And I think this is captured beautifully in this picture, which shows Ted Smith with two farm horses at Column End Farm on Church Road in Lakehampton. Ted didn't retire till he was 80 in 1939, and this photograph was taken to mark his diamond wedding anniversary in 1941 when he went back to the farm to see his old friends there. And I think that's just a lovely picture. This is sort of shows a more typical usage of horses ploughing. This is from World War One. This is Mrs. Winifred Urry, daughter of the vicar at Blimpsfield, ploughing a field there. So looking at other wheeled transport, carts, traps and gigs, usually two-wheeled ones. These wagons were four-wheeled generally. Carts typically light load, carrying. Traps tend to be for passengers rather than carts, but they're interchangeable. And this is a shooting party at Foxcott near Ilmington. It's the horse and cart, and the cart there looks very nice one. A trap or gig was a light open two-wheeled one, very popular in France and America, and often light racing one, which is probably what this one is called. We're pretty sure Peter the Painter was the horse and not the name of the trap. This is a lovely little picture of the nurse, Miss Nurse Wolfe, and her rounds in Godrington, circa 1895. Again, donkey and trap there, very nice. The donkey looks fairly well fed to me there. I don't know about you. But information on the back of this photograph says that her salary was £35 a year, which is about 2,700. So not bad, but it's probably, probably less or more than nurses get today. A lot less, I would think. Moving on to farm wagons, four-wheeled vehicles hauled by single or multiple animals, and the amount of craftsmanship and build skills it took and actually into building these things was immense. Really detailed work. They were essential for farm work and were used for all purposes with lots of different types and styles evolving. And this is a rather nice picture of a haymaking time of a wagon at Charingworth near Ebrington. You can just make out on the front of that wagon that it says Charingworth Farm and it's got the name of the owner on it, which we know, but I haven't put in the presentation. But this is look at this one horse. That's a huge amount of hay on there. It'd be interesting to see if it all stayed there, or by the time they got to the farm, it sort of fallen off. This is the picture at harvest time with loaded wheat being ready to be taken back to the farm to be thrashed. If you look at the front, you notice the horse there. He's taking a rather cheeky munch of a stuck of corn there. So he's thinking, well, I'm here. I might as well have a munch while I'm there. This wagon has ladders front and back to allow a greater load to be put on. They are probably on the hay wain in the top photo as well, except we just can't see them. They're invisible under all that hay. This is a very famous photograph. It's a bow wagon at the Wagon and Horses Inn in Cirencester, which is still there. You still pass it if you go into Cirencester today, though it's no longer a pub. So these bow wagons were so called because the outraves, which is the sort of the sides that extended outwards from the main body, you can see where they curve over the wheels in quite a graceful arch or a bow, hence the name bow wagon. They actually evolved in Gloucestershire and spread beyond it, and they got quite complicated sort of subvariants. So this is actually a Wiltshire stroke West Berkshire variant, and you identify that because if you look at the bow arch running down to the rear of the wagon, it's attached to the wagon's shutlock or the frame, so that distinguishes it. Some of the bow wagons in Gloucestershire didn't have that, so it can get quite complicated, all this stuff on wagons. This is the box wagon. They were far less common in the area, but they were sort of simple planks instead of the curved out raves. And also, if you look at this one, if I look at the very front of the front wheel, it's called a 3/4 lock wagon. And this wheel, when you actually turned, it could go underneath the wagon body, giving it a much greater turning circle, which was useful in the narrow lanes. And the bow wagon at the top hasn't got that. They couldn't go around really tight corners. Look at the urban horse wagons. I love this photograph. It's it's a horse-drawn delivery wagon of the College Grocery Stores in St Paul's Road in Cheltenham, Baglion and Sons. Wagons built for urban purposes, they tended to be smaller and less robust than rural ones, generally because they hauled smaller loads over busier and paved roads. So the going wasn't quite as tough, so they could be made a little bit smaller. Most were box wagons rather than bow wagons, and the box wagons were cheaper to buy. And there were fewer specialist types, but they nearly always had advertising for their owners, as can be seen on this one on the sides here. And of course, grocery stores, rather like our Uber deliveries today or Tesco or Asda deliveries, they delivered everything: bread, cakes, tin goods, cupboard items, milk, dairy. Although some of the dairy carts were specialists and they did have their own ones, like Cheltenham Dairy. I wasn't able to find a photograph of that to show you. But of course, obviously, the other thing they used to deliver is our wonderful cheeses that we have in the county. Stagecoaches. So before the railways, coaches were the main way for people to travel long distances, and there was quite a wide network of routes in the county. This is a stagecoach outside the White Hart Inn in Winchcombe about 1870, which is actually well into the twilight years of coach travel. But of course, Winchcombe didn't get a railway station until quite late, so this is why the stagecoach from Winchcombe is still quite important. Those sat on the roof, they're the outside passengers. Cheaper tickets, but you're exposed to all the weather. And if you fell off, it was your own fault. They often wouldn't stop for you. So in urban and suburban areas, horse buses, which are essentially another name for stagecoaches, became very popular. This is a view of one in London Road in Stroud. They could carry more passengers with fairly better seating, although they weren't common to be covered at this stage. That appeared a little bit later. And they were called omnibuses because they stopped at all stops. So omni means all in Latin, so basically they would stop wherever they could. Looking at a little bit specialist wagon transport, this is Stroud Urban District Council's horse-drawn Merryweather and Sons fire appliance circa 1909. And I've just had a doorbell ring, so I've got to go to the doorbell. So I leave you that bit there just to have a read of that, and I'll be back in a second.
One of the pitfalls of virtual meetings, and one of the upside is that you can all get here, which is wonderful. But yes, things like this do tend to happen sometimes. But I'm sure John will be back in a moment, and we can carry on. Just to fill you in, I've been muting people who haven't muted themselves, but you will have plenty of opportunity to ask questions, or you can either do that through the chat function, or at the end of the talk, I'll unmute everybody and you can just ask John directly.
Okay, I'm back now, Kate. Oh, sorry about that, everybody. It's amazing how many parcels we get delivered at about 1:10 on the fourth Wednesday of the month. It's crazy, but they turn up. So what's interesting about these engines is of course, they were steam powered for the pump. So as soon as the alarm was raised, there would somebody run out, start lighting the fire in the actual fire engine. And then the idea was by the time they hitched the horses and by the time they actually got to the fire, there'd be enough steam pressure to pump water. The biggest problem for these wagons was the water supply, because they didn't carry very much. And a real nice little aside on this picture is if you see the gentleman on the right hand side, there's a little X by him. And on the back of this photo, there's a letter and it says something like, "Dear Dolly, by the X is the young man I'm stepping out with at the moment." So it's sort of a girl's taking a photograph of her date or a boyfriend to send to her sister, which is a lovely little sort of aside, really. Um, this photograph shows horses hauling around wagons, laden wagons around the docks, quite large wagons you can see in the back. So about 1897 or thereabouts. A lot of cargo handling in the docks depended on horsepower, simply because there are lots of tight corners which needed turntables to move wagons around, and steam locomotives couldn't pull like that. So they used horses actually on the edge of the docks. Around the docks, sort of like at Anthony, there were lots more extensive railway sidings, but inside the docks, it was mainly horsepower. Um, this is a cart wash. I've included that partly because it's a real nice photograph of there, and you can see the misty day. This is at Chipping Camden. It's the German artillery gun in the cart wash. Cart washes were quite important. This one was built around in the 1800s, replaced one, a pond, a simple pond lower down. But they were not only used to clean carts in bad weather, but in dry weather, you'd roll your cart through it so the wheels would get wet. And of course, if the wheels dried out too much, they would shrink and all the ironworks, notably the iron tires on them, would fall off. So you tried to keep them wet and damp so they would expand and this wouldn't happen. There's a good little story to this gun. It was given to the town by the War Trophies Commission, and the town people, the town hall, put it on a plinth outside the town hall, but it aroused a real lot of hostility. A lot of people didn't want it, some people did. And one night it was actually dragged away and dumped in the cart wash, which is presumably when this photograph was taken. Subsequently, it was returned to the town hall, but then it was taken away again one night and pushed into a brook. And after that, the town council said, "Okay, we'll just sell it," and it was sold for scrap. A quick look at the nags. Of course, horse racing's had a very long history in Gloucestershire, and this is a picture of the Easter hero winning the 1929 Gold Cup. The first races in the county were held as early as 1612 as part of Captain Dover's annual Cotswold Olympic Games at Chipping Campden. So they had the first organised races there. In 1681, the world's first horse racing club, the Byberry Club, was formed, and that held meetings on Macaroni Downs above the village until sort of the very early 20th century. The first racing at Cheltenham actually took place on Nottingham Hill and then on Cleeve Hill, and it wasn't until 1831 that it moved to the current home of Presby Park, where it's stayed ever since. And of course, the Cotswolds today, an area which attracts lots of sort of real world's racing trainers, and they've got lots of properties all over the place. Looking at two legs, so we have the lovely name of a velocipede. It's a human-powered land vehicle with one or more wheels. And here's a one wheel. This is a classic hand barrow made by the Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company, March 1897. There were thousands of these across in the UK, railway stations, markets and shops, and a large majority were actually made in Gloucester, although the design was fairly common. This is a more unusual one. This is a really odd looking contraption made by the Wagon Works in 1903. It was a one-wheeled carrette, which is similar to an open-top sedan chair. And this one was made for the use of the Crown agent in the colonies. We don't know where, sadly. We can probably look up in the order books to find out. But I had a close look at that, and it's just one wheel with somebody pulling and pushing. So it must have been quite complicated to get on and off with any sort of dignity, I would imagine. The pole, the long pole there goes through the center of the seat, so the man's legs in the seat is either side of it. So again, I think you need to be quite careful getting on and off it. Penny farthings, named after the penny and farthing coins. They were very fast bicycles, really, because the front wheel rotated a long way for every rotation of the legs, and they offered a little bit of comfort as some had solid rubber tires. This is a lovely photo of a gentleman called Charlie Minchin on his penny farthing somewhere in Stroud circa 1900. But this is, I like even the nicer photo. These are members of the Gloucester Cycling Club around about 1880, and again, look at the size of those bikes there. It must be, fairly scary to ride them, I would think. They were popular in the 1870s, but they became obsolete in the late 1880s because of the development of modern bicycles. Now, the modern bikes were then marketed as safety bicycles because of the reduced height and reduced risk of falling off compared to penny farthings. Because you can imagine, penny farthings are quite difficult things to mount and get going and then get off at the end, especially when they didn't really have any brakes. So this is a nice photograph by early bicycles. It's an interesting one, this, because this is taken in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's a posed shot. So if you look carefully at the gentlemen's bikes, you can see sort of a support on the other side to stop them toppling over. What's interesting is these bikes are classic bone shakers. So they were common in the 1860s and 1870s. So this is really quite a late time for them to be being used. They were named simply because of the uncomfortable ride, which was caused by the stiff iron frame and wooden wheels with iron rim tyres. So they must have been awful things to ride. More importantly, they also had no gears or brakes. So if you went downhill, you had to rely on your foot power to try and slow you down. And if your feet slipped off the pedals, you were done for, basically. It must have been very difficult for this chap to actually tow this lady in a tricycle behind. And at the very rear, you'll see a tricycle. Now, these were much stable, much more safer motorcycling, though even this one, we'd had a good look at this and we can't see any brakes or gears on it. So, I'm not sure I'd have allowed my 5-year-old and a toddler going downhill. It'd been quite entertaining, I think. I love this photo. Arthur Davis, champion cyclist and village blacksmith. Although sadly we don't know what village, but on the plus side there isn't a piece of lycra in sight. And it's nice to sort of think that this is the normal cycling gear, which was almost like normal everyday gear. There was no specialist equipment back then. And this is a nice, interesting. This is a cigarette card, and this is the Pedersen cantilever bicycle, which was invented in 1894 by Mikhail Pedersen. Had very unusual design. You can see the sort of the design at the back. Also had a sort of a hammock style saddle. They were never hugely popular, but they enjoy a devoted following, and they are still made today. Some people swear by them, saying they're the best bikes they've ever ridden. I've not tried one. It'd be nice to see what it was like. I think the saddle might be a lot more comfortable than today's modern saddles. Okay, moving on to water. These two pictures show barges on the Stroud Water navigation. They're there's two here. The two men are bow hauling them here. On the bottom photos, there is actually two barges. You can't see the rest of the one. It's on the bottom left-hand side. Bow hauling, especially on rivers, was a very arduous task. And as the volume of traffic increased on the rivers and some towpaths fell into disrepair, they started to use horses instead. So it was a very tough time, not as bad on the canal as it was on the Wye. Bow hauling on the Wye saw an act of parliament because it was just simply decided it was slavery, essentially, and they wanted to change it. The boat at the bottom, the main one, it's being rowed by 4 men, and we think it's an official canal company craft, probably with big wigs on board. If you have a look in the back, there's a 4-piece band playing, and there's a big flag, and there's a flags fore and aft. I've read somewhere that this might have been an ambassador visiting, but I can't find that now reference, so I'm not sure. But this is classic sort of usage of the canal. Boating, popular for both fishing and pleasure. These ones from a map we have in the archives are probably fishing boats, we think, or the one on the left might be just crossing the river. And this is a rather nice photograph here of men rowing a boat on the Severn near Newman. We have an idea that these are probably recuperating soldiers. We're not sure about that, but it's in the same sort of collection of some. It's just got a feel of that. These gentlemen just, relaxing on the boat. And I'll throw in this one here. This is the 1824 when the RNLI was formed. In 1856, Gloucester raised money to buy a lifeboat for the port town of Falmouth. And this is the lifeboat. It's called the City of Gloucester. It actually did demonstration launch in the Gloucester docks before it was taken down to Falmouth. It never actually had to rescue anybody in Falmouth, but it remained there for about 30 years, I think, before it was replaced by a subsequent boat. And today, the RNLI Gloucester branch has got close links with the Falmouth lifeboat. So, if you see your RNLI on a flag day, please put some money in for them. The 7 Trows, they were local cargo vessels, the bigger ones we had around here. They evolved to meet the odd conditions on the Severn, the estuary and the Wye. They basically had flat bottoms so they could take ground quite safely without rolling over or anything. They had masts that could be lowered to go into bridges, and they had a round stern and square sails. So they were quite primitive craft initially, basically in the form of an open double-ended barge. But over time, they developed a more rounded section, a transom, i.e. a flat stern, fore and aft decks very small. Then they became fully decked, and around about 60 foot, 80 meters long. They could take 40 to 100, maybe some more tons of cargo. And the square sail rig morphed into a much more efficient fore and aft ketch rig with topsail and jigs. They were very, very common sort of late 1800s. Numbers dwindled rapidly after 900, and by the 1930s, most had been converted into what they called dumb barges. So everything was stripped out and they were just towed behind motorboats. There's one left at the moment, actually two left at the moment. One is the Spry. She's up at Worcester, and there is another one at Worcester, was built a few years ago of a demonstration of an early Trow. I can't remember the name of that one. There are also a couple of wrecks on the lower Severn at Purton Hulks as well. So steamboats, in the last quarter of the 19th century, there was a high demand for steam launches, locally, nationally, and even internationally, both for pleasure and for work purposes. And this is a rather elegant, unnamed example at Brimscombe Port. It was built by Edwin Clark and Co. Most of their craft, they had orders from London area in the Thames, so most of their craft were dispatched along the Thames and Severn Canal through to the Thames that way. Sadly, this one's unnamed, but it's, it looks like it's a very, very lovely boat. I'd love to sail that. They're probably not afloat today, sadly. Edwin and Clark and Co. were taken over by Abdallah and Mitchell in 1901, and they concentrated on building slightly bigger craft. And this is a lovely picture of Mimi, which was a steam launch. A lot of their stuff was exported overseas, and Mimi went to see river service in Peru. There is an apocryphal tale that Abdallah and Mitchell built the African Queen for the film, but they didn't. Sadly, that's not true. They did build examples like her. This company were building steamboats at Brimscombe from 1900 up to 1929, and several of them were sent as kits. It was easier to transport them as kits rather than load them onto deck complete sort of things. They went out as kits and they were assembled at the destinations. It would be interesting to see if any of their craft are still working today. They might well be in some of the sort of the backwaters, as it were. We have a local oddity in what are termed market boats. They existed in the 1860s, 1920s. They specialised in carrying local farm produce from the countryside to the port towns such as Gloucester, Bristol, Chepstow and Tewkesbury. There were sailing boats earlier than this, but these market boats had a little niche that they carved out for themselves. Most were quite elderly. This is a lovely photo of the La Belle Marie. She was built as early as 1866 by Pickersgill and Miller of Gloucester. She was a pleasure launch designed for a chap called Rudge in Evesham, simply because he'd like to follow the Evesham Rowing Club when they rode up and down the Avon. I mean, to me, she seems a huge vessel for that, but that's what happened. She actually had a massively long life. She was later sold out of Rudge's service. She went down to become a tug at Bristol. Then she crossed the Channel to become a ferry between Penarth and Cardiff. And then actually she ended up in Ireland, where she was a Belfast to Stranraer ferry. And she ended up as the Bristol market boat, sailing from Brockway in the Forest of Dean to Bristol for 10 years, from 1904 to 1914. If you want to see her, she's actually still there, but in complete pieces. There's still little bits of her left in front of the quay. On the quay house at Brockway there, you'll see her propeller shaft and the prop. And that was unusual for being such an early craft, being powered by a screw propeller. Canals, narrowboats and butties. From the 1700s onwards, canals were a nationwide transport network, but of course with the advent of railways, their usage gradually died away. This is a really nice photograph of a narrowboat heading towards Brimscombe Port. And if you have a close look, you can see the hauling horses on the right-hand side there. And this boat is quite heavily laden, which most canal boats were. And of course, they didn't have to worry about it being swamped by sort of any waves or anything. So they could be loaded quite heavily. Bulk cargoes were the reason d'etre of these canals, and the most common cargo was coal. And this again is a lovely photograph of the barge Alert being unloaded at Brimscombe Mills. These both appear to be what they call standard canal boats, narrow boats, 72-foot long, beam of 7 foot, capable of taking about 40 tons of cargo. If you have a close look at the guys unloading this barge here, the Alert, you notice they're actually going across, they're carrying a hod, and they're actually on double planks. We think this is just outside Brimscombe Mill itself, and they're going into the gap of the fence. This is probably the easiest way for this mill to get its coal supply, and it was probably cheaper than the rail for a while as well, I would think. I've included this one just to show what you can gauge from, or get from these photos. So this is an unloading narrowboat on the Stridwater Canal at the basin known as the Ocean. The Ocean was formed in the construction of the canal when the earthworks for the towpath embankment blocked a stream that ran into the River Frome. So it actually filled up. And in the 1840s, this basin, it was actually used to bring materials for building the Bristol and Gloucester railway line. And then when this, yes,
we lost your audio there for a minute. I did, at least. Did anyone else lose John for a minute there? Put your hand up if you. Oh, maybe it was just me. Okay. Okay. It could be the Wi-Fi here. Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
As you were.
As you were. No, we can hear me now. That's the main thing. So yeah, so this Ocean, it was actually then used by the railway company to bring goods, materials to build the railway. But then they thought, well, we've got this here, let's put a siding. So they actually put a little narrow siding along there, which you can just make out in the first edition map there. And they actually put sort of an inlet there to form a little dock, so actually barges could come in and pick up coal or take things away. And they built this sort of shed, which you can see there, to cover it. And they also built what's called a chute from the railway. Now, it's actually is spelt S-H-O-O-T from the railway, but presumably it was a chute, a C-H-U-T-E from the railway. So again, a fascinating little thing. And again, in this picture, we've got a combination of things. So you've got the canal boat on the front. In the background, you've got a southbound mixed good train. It's heading down towards Froster. And in the siding, which you probably can't make out in this, there is a Midland Railway 5-plank 10-ton open wagon. But again, have a little close look behind the end of that barge where the gentleman is standing, and you'll notice that there's lots of little water lids and things. So it looks like by this date, which is early 1920s, we think, the actual basin was little used, which is a shame because it's used a lot for fishing today apparently, and hopefully soon there'll be more narrowboats running up and past it. And if you look very, very closely on the narrowboat, on the cabin, you can see classic roses and castles decoration on the cabin doors there. Again, this picture will go on our exhibition later on in the month, and I'll try and blow that up so you can see it a little bit better. So, believe it or not, there's 3 submarines that visited Gloucestershire. The first were HM Submarines H33 and H49, which made a 5-day visit to the docks in March 1937. And we've actually got some video film of this. And on the banks, you can see one of our very much treasured but sadly departed Mr. Frith. He was a schoolboy. He went down to watch this, and it was filmed. So we've got these 2 machines here, fantastic things. They both saw active service in World War II. H33, which you can see here, it's the main one. She made 5 war patrols and survived the war to be decommissioned in 1944. H49 made 12 war patrols, sank 1 German craft, but she herself was sank in October 1940 with only 1 survivor. And then later, after the war, October 1957, HMS Shrimp, a Stickleback class midget submarine, made a goodwill visit to the Severn estuary. She visited Avonmouth, Bristol, Gloucester, Tewkesbury, and even Worcester. And while she was in Gloucester and Bristol, she made demonstration dives in the docks, complete with a display of sabotage attacks by frogmen who they carried in. And this is a picture of her in the docks just by Baker's Quay, I think. And thanks to British Pathé, who allowed us to use this slide at no cost, bless them. So it's a lovely picture. If you go onto British Pathé and search for Shrimp Ahoy, you can see a video of a visit to the docks and also a visit of her diving. So moving on to 4-wheel steam, we'll start off with traction engines. Steam-powered vehicles used to move heavy loads on road, plough ground, or provide power. And despite being sort of large, slow, hard to manoeuvre, they revolutionised agriculture and road haulage at a time when only draft horses were available. They became popular in industrialised countries from 1850 onwards and remained in use well into the 1940s. This fantastic photo here, this is the Duchess of Worcester, a Burrell & Sons Showman's Road locomotive, number 2350, and this is taken at the Winchcombe Mop Fair. It's about 1901. She was built as a dual-purpose machine that hauled the rides to and from fairs, but also generated electricity to light and drive them. And if you have a look at the front of this engine, above the man's head there, you can see quite a large dynamo, which powered the actual rides. Steam rollers, used for rolling, road making, flattening ground, very common sights. this one has had a mishap. It's come down Prime Road in Cheltenham. It's driven over a covered well and it's collapsed into it. And this is in 1922 when, of course, they were still being used. Before we move on, I'll just say that the Duchess of Worcester is no longer with us, sadly, but her sister traction engine number 2351 is still with us, and she's often seen at local county steam fairs. So again, if you want to see an engine like this, go to those. They're great. And I can't not resist putting this picture in. It's a fantastic view of Henry Workman timber merchant sawmills at Woodchester, 1930-31. Lots of things to see. Left and right, you can see horse-drawn timber forwarders. Now, these were specialist wagons used to transport felled trees, and they could be adjusted for different trunk lengths, so you can make them shorter or longer. And up at Stanway at the moment, they found one of these in the woods ruined, and they are bringing it back to sort of usage. So that's something to look forward to in the future. In the centre, steam traction engine, a steam up, there's steam coming from the chimney, while on the far right you can make out two motor cars there as well. So this has got everything, this photo. I love it. In the yard as well, there's a large steam train which moved on a set of rails. Now the sawmill, we know, had rail sidings to the right hand side, and they connected to the Golden Valley, Stroud and Swindon line, so they could get sort of goods out and materials in if they needed. We look at steam lorries. These were self-contained steam-powered goods vehicles as opposed to traders towed behind traction engines introduced in the early 1900s. The most common one was this one, the standard Sentinel. It's made by the Sentinel Wagon Works of Shrewsbury. Paul had me for that one. And this example was owned by Henry Cole and Co. of Cirencester in 1920. They resembled motor lorries rather than traction engines, and really the only reason they died out was competition from internal combustion engines vehicles and adverse legislation about vehicle weights, because they were much heavier than normal lorries and they did a lot more damage. So few survived into commercial use beyond World War II. I have it on good authority that my granddad was the first person to own one in Gloucestershire, and I have found the record in our vehicle registrations, but I couldn't get it in time to show you today. On the tracks, looking at trains, steam locomotives, all shapes and sizes. So this is Siam, 040, it's the number of wheels, so 0 at the front, 4 in the middle, 0 at the back. Outside cylinder, you can see the steam cylinder there on this side. Shunter engine, used by the wagon works for moving carriages and wagons along the High Orchard branch of the Midland Railway, which they're accessing, but also more raw materials, fuel, and for vehicles around its site on the Bristol Road. So there's a whole load of sort of track works around there. And they had about 4 or 5 shunters, but this is the only one we've got a real nice photo of. Locomotive below it here, Great Western Railway 5800 class. Again, a 20-ton 040 T for tank locomotives. Built at GWR Swindon Works in 1933, used for light branch line work, and they were very, very common sights in our area. The last of them was drawn in 1961, but none of them have been preserved. There are several locomotives that look like this, 040 tanks, but none of these have. If we look at the express trains, they're the show-offs of the steam area. This is a nice photograph of number 2907 Lady Disdain, a 460 Saint class speed on the GWR main line. It's evocative. You can see speed along that one, can't you? A little bit up to date. This is 1974. This is the Pendennis Castle passing through Gloucester Central Station. It was sold to Australia after this, and then it came back. We'll look at the last slide. They superseded the Saints as they could reach 100 miles an hour, which, you know, phenomenal speed today, you know, and in steam, and they must have been fantastic to see at speed. As I said, this one is the second ever steam locomotive to go around the world, because it followed the Flying Scotsman, went to Australia via the Suez Canal, but when it came back, it came to England via the Panama Canal. So it's gone around the world, which is nice. And today you can actually see this locomotive at the Didcot Railway Centre. And if you go on a steam day and it's steamed out, it is such an impressive sight. However, much more common was what they called the GWR Autocoach, and these were used for push-pull trains, and they were powered by a steam locomotive at one end, and there was a driving cabin at the other end of the carriage. So that meant that the actual driver could drive the train from the cab end or from the locomotive end, so he didn't have to worry about being one end or the other sort of thing. If there was more than one coach to be pulled, such as these pictures at steam mills, you can just make out the locomotive in the right there, and there's carriages before and after it. They were known as Autotrains rather than Autocoaches. And on the rural routes of the county, such as Stroud, Sharpness, Forest of Dean, they enabled a much more frequent service to be operated at lower cost. And the real advantage was that they didn't have to build turntables, so the locomotive didn't have to sort of uncouple, run around, get turned round, recouple. And in the photo at the top here, you'll notice that this train's pulled into Sharpness station. It must now be going the other way because they've put the little white light on it, the red light warning light at the back. So it's now going to pull out to the right rather than go to the left. Private owner wagons, very, very common in the railways. When British Railways was formed, they inherited over 500,000 private owner wagons. And these wagons belong to four main classes of owners: collieries, manufacturers, industrial users, and local coal merchants. And as virtually every industrial process required coal or coke, the most common with these wagons here, as you can see, 5 and 7 plank coal wagons, they were known as. Collieries had hundreds of them. Small local merchants usually had one or two. And as you can see at the bottom, this one here by Bert, it's beehive manufacturer. It's got to be it's a fairly small scale business, but he's got them. He's got one wagon to bring all his coal in. So again, wonderful things. These are from pictures from the Gloucester Railway Carriage and Wagon Company. We've got 115 albums of wagons basically they made, and they are wonderful details, and they are really worth having a look at. We look at the trams. The City of Gloucester Tramways Company had been running horse-drawn trams in the city since 1879. They couldn't really make it pay, apparently. But in 1902, the company was bought by the City of Gloucester Corporation for 26,000, which is about 2 million today. And included in the sale were the India Road and Bristol Road tram depots, the track, 14 tram cars, 8 omnibuses, 6 showerbangs, and 100 horses, which on their own were valued at 2,500. And this is a rather nice picture of a Gloucester Tramways. It's gone, obviously, it's going to Kingsholm from somewhere, but it's a lovely advert for Stroud Brewery on the side as well. When the council took over, they rebuilt the system to a larger gauge and electrified it. And the last horse-drawn tram in Gloucester ran on 17th of March 1904. The Gloucester trams, 30 strong electric trams they're built by Brush electrical machines of Loughborough, and they could reach a top speed of 12 miles an hour. Four-wheel open-top double enders, and they're painted in crimson and cream, although from World War I onwards they were just painted in plain grey apparently. We don't know why. The last trams ran on January 1933, and then they were replaced by motorbuses. And every now and then you'll see a report in the paper where they dig up one of the lines in the Eastgate or Westgate areas. They always crop up occasionally. But they didn't just haul passengers. And this is a fascinating example. In 1917, they built an extension from Brockworth out to the Brockworth Aerodrome, which was then being built. And so they laid track from the sidings at Gloucester Docks, where much of the materials are unloaded. And then they actually had some trams done as black Mariahs were altered so they could be locomotives to pull railway trucks. And you can see here, this is the black Mariah. Behind it, there are 3 trucks. Now, in my point of view, they don't look in very good condition. The middle one looks like it's broken its back almost. And of course, the trams here had a different gauge to the railway. So these trucks were probably converted railway ones to run the tramway, but stored somewhere. But I think it's a fascinating photograph. And again, it's not one that many people know about. Moving on to internal combustion motors, we'll look at lawnmowers first. Lawnmowers they invented 1830 by Edward Beard Budding while working for John Ferriby at the Phoenix Foundry Thorpe. That's a good one to say. So they were push-pull, obviously were man-powered to start with, but Ferriby and Budding licensed design, notably to Ransoms, who began making budding mowers in 1832. In 1902, they produced the first powered lawnmower driven by a horizontal axis internal combustion gasoline engine. And this photo is a lovely photo. It shows it's either a Ransom self-propelled 20-inch Mark II or an 8-inch Mark III motor mower, powered by Villiers' little engine, 2-stroke engine, and it's at the lawn in the old rectory, Rusbury Said Edge, around about 1820, and it's thanks to the Old Lawnmower Club. Yes, there is such a thing. The Old Lawnmower Club who provided the information on what that machine was. Motorcycles began to appear in the late 1800s when bicycle makers realised they could actually start putting an engine into their bikes. This lovely photograph of Mr. James Wood, the County Council's road roller inspector on a Lloyd motorbike in the council depot in 1914. And it's a fantastic machine. It's got a number plate there. The number plate comes from Birmingham, which is where the company was based. And this model is actually advertising is boasted a chain and belt drive for both high and low speed running. So, you know, you can go fast and slow with it. And this is a nice little shot of Ralph D's garage in Nailsworth, which obviously it's a bikers ride out or meet up in sometime in the 1920s. And above their heads, the nearest one's a lovely sign for Castrol GTX, which we all used to know and love as an engine oil. Motorcycle sidecars and outfits, often seen as a rather sedate way of travelling, very elegant, very laid back. Not always, though. I love this photograph. It's a scrambling trial in Penwood, King Stanley, with a board outfit. An outfit is a motorcycle sidecar, fighting uphill with Bill Hayward driving and Miss Grant Nealis in the chair. And I've attended motorcycle trials, and this is great. Get people leaning in, they'll be jumping up and down on that bike, trying to get it up the hill. It must be fantastic to see that one. Motor cars began to increase, and here we have Dr. Foster. You know, he went to Gloucester, but in his motor car. It's a Georges Richard Le Pony automobile voiturette of about 1903-04. We know this vehicle was built in several different marques over quite a long period of time. One cylinder, 708cc engine producing 4.5 horsepower, top speed of 31 mph. But it could do 62 miles on a tank and averaged a respectable 35 miles per gallon, which is quite impressive. And the number plate here, AD31, indicates that it was the 31st car to be registered in the county. By 1921, there was the number plate AD 9,999 in reach. So cars really took off. An example here, this is a lovely Coventry Climax owned by Charles Alfred Appley, who's a woolen manufacturer from Rodborough. Royal blue in colour with primrose lines and wheels. We know that from its registration papers. And I also look at the gauntlets that the driver is wearing. These are the same sort of things that early pilots used to wear. The registration numbers were often reused. This one itself had been reused twice earlier on cars owned by Appley and twice more later on before it's actually cancelled. And then this is a lovely picture of Mr. Bolland, who's probably the chauffeur on a 1907 Striker Squire CSB model. French car design made by Cornelio Saint-Brieuve, hence CSB, but they were made under license at Bristol. So it's a locally made car. Motor buses, couple of ones here. Winchcombe Street scene for Troughton's Omnibus. So it was one of 2 operators running a daily service from Winchcombe to Cheltenham. By the 1890s, the Crown Hotel and Cheltenham High Street acted as a transport hub, served 42 destinations in the county. So that's a lot of places they're going to drive to and from. And this one for the geeks amongst us is a GWR bus. It's their number 16 bus, and it's a 20 horsepower Mills Daimler standard double deck 018/16 RO bus. They had different versions, and it took me a couple of days to figure out what this one was, but it's quite fun learning about it. The GWR had an extensive system of road vehicles, you know, primarily for its delivering to its rail services, but had buses, delivery vehicles, carts and flatbeds. So they weren't just a railway. And this is interesting, this one, it's taking people from sort of Chalford to Stroud, even though there were stations at Chalford and Brimscombe. So it's quite interesting why they're doing that, but they did. And we know bus services from Stroud Station started in 1905 to link to the steam rail services. But this bus, actually, the CO84 number plate indicates it was registered at Exeter. So it's quite come a long way up. This is the lovely Charabanc of the National Omnibus and Transport Company in London Road in Stroud. The name comes from the French Charabanc, which means wagon with benches, and they were fairly long 4-wheeled vehicles with several rows of side entry forward seats. We always hear and joke about Charabancs. They are often used by private owners to convey guests on excursions. Factory owners' days out on the Charabanc was a common thing. Agricultural stuff, 1840s, you had portable steam engines, which they could be moved, set up, and they would run. They were used to drive lots of mechanical farm machinery, pumps, chaff and turnip cutters, threshing machines by way of a big flexible belt. But by the late 1870s, they'd been overtaken by self-propelled portable steam engines, i.e. traction engines. And this, again, a lovely picture shows W.H. Browning and Sons traction engine powering a Marshalls of Gainsborough threshing machine. You can see the belt in the background there. So this is your classic Dad's Army scene. You know, we've all seen it. We all love it. I mean, they must have been wonderful things to see. But from the 1900s, portable combustion engines started to come. They're mostly hit and miss engines. These worked by firing up the engine, and it would run at set speed, and when it slowed down, it would fire again. then it maybe not fire for a couple of strokes, hence the hit and miss. But they ran on petrol paraffin, and they became very, very common. Nowadays, they tend to be called stationary engines, although technically that's not right. But this is a lovely picture of one made by Lister, which I took this year at the Malvern Agricultural Show. Combustion engine tractors became popular 1920s, really. 1890s, they've been developed in America. Diesel ones didn't become common until after the 1960s. And this picture shows 3 International Titan tractors being delivered to W.G. Bridges at Cirencester. He was one of the first motor vehicle garages and dealerships. I mean, if you have a look at a close look at the two on the left-hand side, they appear to be second-hand models, or they've been tested in the many fields. The wheels look like they're covered in mud there. This is a rather nice thing of an international tractor by John Jeffries' son, hauling a conifer on a Baron's tree transplanting machine. Actually revolutionised the movement of mature trees. And it was designed by a chap called Baron, who was a famous landscape gardener up in Derbyshire, and he wrote the book on how you look after and move and replant conifers. There's only one of these machines surviving today, but its future is bright as it is at Kew Gardens, and it's maintained in working order. I've not seen it moved out there. I'd like to go and see it work. It'd be fantastic. Quick look at military vehicles, mainly the Gloucestershire Railway Carriage and Wagon Works. They built a lot of railway carriages, but they produced military equipment when needed. In the Boer War, they made horse-drawn ambulances. In the World War I, they made rail wagons, stretchers, ambulances, artillery limbers, such as here, aircraft components and shells. In World War II, they made Churchill tanks, and they were only one of only 2 factories that actually built the whole complete tank rather than just made components. 1942, Queen Mary visited the factory in Gloucester, and en route, her car was preceded by one of the company's Churchills. You wonder how much damage it might have done to the road as it tore it up there. Moving on to flying. Airships, this is the Willows airships, Willow airship number 2, which say 1910. It's built by Ernest Willows, a pioneer Welsh aviator. Again, hydrogen-filled gas bag, elegant looking craft, powered by a 30 horsepower engine. The pilot sat in a gondola, which you can see at the bottom. It's bamboo and steel, so it's quite interesting. Steering was done by the rudder, which you can see in the top photo, and you can't quite see the propellers on this because they're in front of the gondola bag, and they actually pivot up and down, and also can be turned left and right to provide some direction. The month after this was taken, Willows flew to London, 122 miles, took 10 hours, which is a record for a cross-country flight in Britain at the time, and also flew across the Bristol Channel, which hadn't been done up till then. Heavier than air. We don't know anything about this picture really, except it was probably the first flight in Gloucestershire of a heavier than air aircraft. The aviator was called H. Higgins. It might have been J.F. Higgins, who fought in the Boer War as an artillery officer, got fascinated by flying, and later rose to the rank of Air Marshal in the RAF. So again, it's quite an interesting picture. We'd love to find out more about that. Gloucester Airplane Company, not to be confused with the GAC, as we'll see later. This is the Barnet and Ping GAC monoplane on a display at Gloucester's Carnival. You could come and sit in the cockpit for a small fee, and if you look very closely, there is a lady actually sat in the cockpit in a queue. It's also covered by screens, so you can't see the airplane unless you pay a bit of money. They were early aircraft pioneers and were based in Barton Street, and the machine itself, very small single-seat aircraft, 32-foot wingspan, powered by a rotary engine made by another aviation pioneer company, the Phoenix Radial Rotary Motor Company Limited, and they were in Gloucester, and they were quite famous as well, and their engines were very well respected. Sadly, we don't know whether this ever flew. They made 2 airplanes in total. We don't know. But flying became very popular, especially around that period, and you get all around Britain races, displays, and air displays. This is James Valentine, a famous aviator, in his 1910 Deeper du Sam monoplane at Gloucester in the 1911 Daily Mail Circuit of Britain, which is a prize to race around Britain, a set course with £10,000 at the end of it. This is a little Dursley fate. In 1911, they had an airplane, a Blériot 11 monoplane came, and you could actually come and look at this airplane. You know, if you gave a little bit of money, it was then going to give demonstration flights later. But again, we don't know if it ever did. idea of the flying circus, Alan Cobham's flying circus. This is the 1932 programme for it. It was part of Cobham's plan to inspire municipal authorities to build airports, primarily to boost his own business as an aviation consultant. But it was supported by government because they saw it as a way of getting lots of airports cheaply, and they didn't have to pay for it, which would become important in World War II. Between 32 and 35, 990,000 people came to fly in Cobham's aircraft, for a fee, and over 3 million came to see the display. So they were organised everywhere. This is a shot from the one at Churchdown. If you notice on the picture, there's a wing walker at the bottom there. This isn't just any wing walking. This is wing walking across back and forwards the whole plane. So rather scary. Schneider Trophy, Civil Seaplane Trophy, generated huge nationalistic overtones. This is the Gloster 3, which finished second in the 1925 race. To compete for the 27, because England hadn't done well in 26, the Air Ministry ordered 3 high-speed float planes from Gloucester, Supermarine and Shorts. This is the Gloster 4, which they only managed 5 laps of the course, came second to the winner, the Supermarine S5, which of course went on to become the Spitfire. It was later found that the Gloster 4 had a cracked propeller, and one more circuit it would have just disintegrated in midair, so it's very lucky. 32, we've got this lovely airliner, Handley Page Hercules. I visited Brockworth. It's the largest airliner at the world at the time, 38 passengers, 500 miles range, and 100 mile an hour. This one came simply because a bunch of critics were coming to see George Bernard's play at the Malvern. So actually, when it came here, after they left, it gave a joyride to local civic dignitaries from Cheltenham and Gloucester and Stroud and Tewkesbury, trying to persuade them to make an airdrome. And then it gave public flights. Pre-booked tickets from Thomas Cook cost you 10 shillings and sixpence, about 25 quid. I'd have paid double that to get a ride in one of these. At the start of World War II, taken into RAF service, but she and her sister were at Bristol Whitchurch Airport in 1940 when there was a massive gale and the 2 machines were blown into each other and written off, sadly. The jet age, first British jet aircraft was the Gloster E.28-39. It's built to test Frank Whittle's power jets, built by Gloucester Aircraft Company, first at Brockworth, but it moved it to Regent Motors in Cheltenham as a precaution against bombing. 1941, the prototype was ready, didn't have a flight capable engine, but they moved it to Brockworth to do ground tests. And in one of these, it made a series of short bunny hops about 6 feet off the ground, which were the first flight of a jet aircraft. And there's recently been a plaque unveiled to celebrate that. Subsequently, it went to RF Cranwell, where Gloucester's chief test pilot flew it a 17-minute flight. It was the 4th jet aircraft to fly. The first one was a German Heinkel HE-6178. But in February 41, Gloucester received the specification F9/40 twin-engine jet fighter, and the fantastic Gloucester Meteor was born. First flew on 5th of March 43, first production model, 12th of January, joined RAF in July 1944, the Allies' only jet aircraft to achieve combat operations during World War II. And it's a wonderful aircraft, one of the most successful aircraft of all time. Thousands were built to fly the RAF and other air forces, and they remained in use for donkey's years. Only today, 5 are still airworthy. I don't know if any of them are Britain, sadly. Quick look at holiday flights and day trips. I realise the time's running on here. First operator from Staverton, which is the main aerodrome in the area, was Railway Air Services. They called into Staverton on their Birmingham, Bristol and Manchester showroom services. This is looks like it's an outing for the Railway Carriage Works Secretary Company. We know this was done, but we don't have the precise details of who or why got in there. This particular aircraft, believe it or not, is still flying, or it was still flying in 2011 in the USA. So again, it would be lovely to see that one back over here. Lots of other air rays started up, and land came and called at Staverton. Probably the older people among us will remember the Dakotas coming in. This is one of the last ones. It was a Shorts SD 330 through 200 from Intercity Airlines. Very short-lived airline, lasted about 3 years. And I don't know if anybody ever saw this one come in. This is NASA's shuttle carrier aircraft bringing Enterprise at RAF Fairford on its way to Paris Air Show in '83. Fairford was designated an transoceanic abort landing site for the shuttle. So if there'd been an emergency in the shuttle when it's taking off, and the conditions were right and the time was right and the place right, it would have flown into Fairford, landed there. It's a 2-mile long runway at Fairford. It had NASA trained fire and medical personnel on the base. Interestingly, if something had gone wrong in the ascent, it would have been landing at Fairford just 15 minutes after launching. It's going that fast. Only a couple of slides left now. I'd call this one a mutant, because it looks like a mutant. This is the Gloucestershire Carriage Wagons Company gantry car built for Magnus Volt's Brighton and Rottingdean Seashore Railway Company. It was a railway built sort of on low tide mark, so it covered over the wheels, ran from Brighton to Rottingdean, to our tall metal legs powered by electricity. Quite why they did it, I don't know. I think it's to replace a railway that never existed. But the coach body had a ship's bell and a lifeboat, and it had to be driven by a sea captain rather than an engine driver. Amazing machine. Sadly, obviously, it never survived. And finally, cut the slides. Winter of 62, 63, coldest on record in the UK, massive snow drifts all over the place. You know, children love the snow, and I love this one. You haven't got a proper sled, so I use anything I can. Though the snow lasted for over 2 months, so I find that even these kids must have got fed up with it. And I know for something that the midwife attending my birth on the 5th of March had to dig her way through the snow to get to me, and my dad had to dig out to meet her and everything. So again, it was a great time, but I'm glad we really don't get snow like that anymore. And the last slide finally is Father Christmas on his sleigh in Westgate Street, taken in 1962. We don't know why, we don't know the context of this, but it was probably a round table thing or something, but it must have been quite fun. And there's our last slide. So just a couple of reminders for you. We'll happily try and use the chat if we can figure it out. If we don't get time to answer a question, email us. And if you've got an evaluation form, please fill that in. It's great. And lastly, 2 reminders. The next Saturday presentation is Anything That Moves on 3rd of December. It's a sister presentation to this one. Deal with all things transport. We've got talks about Titanic and other things, stands from local transport organisations, Jet Age and others, Thomas the Tank Age layout, a layout of Horton Road crossing. We've got loads of stuff going on. It should be a really good afternoon. So please have a look at the website. You can see it there and come. And lastly, we're not doing a Secrets Revealed talk in December. Basically, it falls at that time when we're all full of cheese and we don't know what day it is. So we thought there's very little point. So our next one is going to be on the 25th of January, which will be entitled Secrets Revealed If Walls Could Talk, which will focus on house history. So I hope you've all enjoyed that. I'm going to end this slideshow now if I can. If I'm not sure how to do that, so I'm going to, because I've got a slide here. Does it work there? No, I can't do anything. Let's push escape. There we go. And I'll try that. So yeah.
Thank you, John. That was amazing. I mean, you filled up the whole time. If anybody has got a question, that's fine by me. Sarah has put a question in the chat, which is, you mentioned number plates. Is there a way to look up old number plates to find out who owned a vehicle?
Yes, there is. If you're in Gloucestershire, you can have a look on the archives website. We do have registration numbers. I think up to, it was taken over, so I'm going to say up to the 50s or 60s, I think it is. So we've got all the early ones. So we have registration index cards. We have the first registration documents. We don't have much in the subsequent registration. What they did is, if a car moved out of the county, they tended to strike it from the record. So sometimes you can be very lucky and get a lot of information. But have a look on our website, see if you can find it. If not, just email us in and we'll direct you how to do it. The same should apply to other counties as well, but I don't know how well the survival rate of those are. And we'll direct you how to do it. The same should apply to other counties as well, but I don't know how well the survival rate of those are. And we'll direct you how to do it. The same should apply to other counties as well. The same should apply to other counties as well. The same should apply to other counties as well. The same should apply to other counties as well. The same should apply to other counties as well. The same should apply. The same should apply. The same should apply. The same should apply.